The morning started like any other Tuesday in Cedar Falls. Coffee shops opened their doors, school buses began their routes, and people hurried to work with their usual routines. Nobody expected their quiet mountain town to change forever before. Noon dot around 10:30, old Pete was sweeping the sidewalk outside his hardware store when he heard something unusual. Hoofbeats. Not the slow clip-clop of a trail horse, but the urgent rhythm of someone riding fast. He looked up from his broom and froze. A girl on horseback burst from the tree line at the edge of town. But this wasn't just any girl. She looked like she'd stepped out of another time, another world entirely. Her long black hair flew behind her like a banner, and her skin was deeply tanned from years under the sun. She wore clothes that looked handmade, a simple brown dress and leather boots that had seen countless miles, but what really caught everyone's attention was her horse. The animal was magnificent, painted with bright red and white symbols across its chest and face. The designs weren't random decorations. They looked ancient, meaningful, like the old Native American war paint Pete had seen in history books. The girl pulled her horse to a stop right in front of the general store. She sat tall in the saddle, scanning the street with sharp, intelligent eyes. Her gaze moved from building to building, person to person, taking in everything. There was something wild about her, untamed, like a deer that might bolt at any second by. Now a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Chen from the bakery stood in her doorway, flour still dusting her apron. Tommy, the young mechanic, had come out from under the hood of a pickup truck, wrench still in his hand. Even the kids waiting for the late bus stopped their chattering to stare. The girl slid down from her horse with fluid grace. Her feet touched the ground silently, and she moved like someone who knew the wilderness better than concrete sidewalks. She tied her horse's reins to a lamppost, whispering something in what sounded like Spanish mixed with words nobody recognized. Sheriff Thompson was having his usual late-morning coffee when dispatch called. "Jim, you need to get down to Main Street. We've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" he asked, already reaching for his hat. "Hard to explain. Just get down here." When Sheriff Thompson arrived, he understood why the dispatcher had trouble explaining. The girl stood beside her painted horse, completely calm despite the growing crowd of curious onlookers. She looked young, maybe 17 or 18, but there was something ancient in her eyes, like she'd seen more of life than most adults ever would. "Morning, miss," the sheriff said, approaching slowly. He dealt with runaway kids before, but this felt different. "I'm Sheriff Thompson. What's your name?" The girl studied him for a long moment before answering. Her voice was clear but had a slight accent, and her English seemed careful, like she was translating thoughts from another language. "I am called Maya," she said simply. "Maya, that's a pretty name. Where are you from?" She gestured toward the mountains that surrounded their town. From there, from everywhere and nowhere. Sheriff Thompson tried a different approach. "Are your parents looking for you? Family?" Something shifted in Maya's expression. A shadow crossed her face, and for a moment she looked much older than her years. "I have no family now," she said. "My grandmother walked the spirit path 3 moons ago." The way she said it, "walked the spirit path," made it clear she meant death, but in words that came from a different way of understanding the world. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sheriff Thompson said gently. "But you can't just ride into town without any identification or family contact. There are procedures, people who can help you." Maya's spine straightened and her eyes flashed with something. "Fierce and proud? Help?" she repeated. "I need no help. I have lived in the mountains since I was small. I know which plants heal and which ones harm. I can find water when others see only dry earth. I can read the sky and know if storms come. I hunt and fish and make my own shelter." "Why do I need help?" the crowd murmured. Some people looked impressed, others concerned. A few seemed skeptical, wondering if this girl was telling the truth or just making up stories. "That's all very impressive," Sheriff Thompson said. "But you're still a minor. The law says we need to make sure you're safe, that you have proper supervision." "Supervision?" Maya's voice rose slightly. "Who supervises the eagle? Who watches over the wolf? Who tells the mountain lion where to hunt?" She stepped closer to her horse, one hand resting on the animal's neck. The horse immediately calmed under her touch, as if they shared some invisible connection. "I belong to no one," Maya declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No person owns me, no place claims me. I am free, like the wind, like the water that runs down from the peaks." Mrs. Chun whispered to her neighbor, "That poor child. She must be traumatized, living alone in the wilderness." But Tommy the mechanic had a different reaction. "Look at her," he muttered. "She doesn't look traumatized. She looks, I don't know, powerful, like she could survive anything." He was right. Despite her youth, Maya carried herself with confidence that most adults never achieved. Her clothes might be simple, but they were well made and practical. Her horse was healthy and clearly well cared for. Her skin glowed with health, and her eyes were clear and alert. Sheriff Thompson found himself in an unusual position. Most runaway cases were straightforward, scared kids needing to get home or troubled youth acting out. Maya didn't fit any category he'd encountered. "Maya," he said carefully, "I believe you can take care of yourself in the wilderness, but this is different. This is society with rules and systems. You need documents, identification, proof of education. You need somewhere legal to live." "Legal?" Maya tilted her head like a curious bird. "The deer do not ask permission to drink from the stream. The hawks do not need papers to fly over your town. What makes human laws more important than natural laws?" It was a question that left several people in the crowd thinking. In the distance, a church bell chimed 11 o'clock, reminding everyone that time was moving forward. That this strange encounter was really happening in their ordinary Tuesday morning. Maya's horse stamped impatiently, sensing tension in the air. She soothed him with quiet words in that mixture of languages, her hand tracing some of the painted symbols on his neck. These markings, Dr. Rodriguez from the medical clinic had pushed through the crowd and was studying the horse with professional interest. "They're not just decorative, they tell a story, don't they?" Maya nodded, surprised to find someone who understood. "Each symbol has meaning. This one," she pointed to a red circle on the horse's forehead, "means protection on long journeys. This," her finger traced a white zigzag line, "represents the lightning that taught my grandmother to respect the power of storms." "Your grandmother taught you these traditions?" "She taught me everything. How to read the stars, how to speak with animals, how to find food in the forest when others would starve. She taught me that wisdom lives in the old ways, the ways people forget when they live in boxes made of wood and stone." As Maya spoke about her grandmother, her fierce independence softened slightly. The pain of loss was evident, even though she tried to hide it behind proud words. Sheriff Thompson realized this situation was beyond anything he'd handled before. This wasn't just about a runaway teenager. This was about a young woman who'd been raised in a completely different world with different values, different knowledge, different ways of understanding life itself. The crowd had grown larger. Word was spreading through town about the mysterious girl on the painted horse. People were taking pictures with their phones, though Maya seemed puzzled by the small devices everyone kept pointing at her. "Maya," Sheriff Thompson said finally, "I can see you're not like other kids who end up in my office, but I still have responsibilities. Would you be willing to come to the station, just to talk? We need to figure out what happens next." Maya looked at her horse, then at the surrounding mountains, then back at the sheriff. The wild freedom she'd known all her life was already slipping away, replaced by human complications she'd never had to face. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "what happens to Espiritu?" "Espiritu? My horse. His name means spirit. He was wild when I found him, injured and alone. I healed him, and he chose to stay with me. We are how do you say partners?" The connection between girl and horse was obvious to everyone watching. They moved together, communicated without words, trusted each other completely. "We'll make sure your horse is taken care of," Sheriff Thompson promised. Though he wasn't entirely sure how Maya stood silent for a long moment, weighing a decision that would change everything. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows on the street. Her old life in the mountains was already becoming a memory. Whatever came next would be different, challenging, maybe impossible, but as she looked around at the faces watching her, some concerned, some afraid, Maya made her choice. She would face this new world the same way she'd faced everything else in her 17 years of life, with courage, dignity, and the unshakable belief that freedom was not something others could give or take away. It was something that lived inside her, as natural and necessary as breathing itself. 2 days after Maya's arrival, a white government car pulled up to the sheriff's station. Jennifer Walsh stepped out, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that meant business. She'd driven 3 hours from the state capital after receiving what had to be the strangest case file of her career. Jennifer had been a social services agent for 12 years. She'd seen everything: kids living in cars, teenagers raising their younger siblings, families struggling in ways that would break your heart. But Maya Rodriguez was something entirely new. "So where's our mystery girl?" Jennifer asked Sheriff Thompson as he led her through the station. "In the back conference room. Fair warning, though. She's not like any kid you've dealt with before." "They all say that," Jennifer replied, adjusting her glasses. "Troubled teens have a way of seeming unique until you understand their situation." Sheriff Thompson stopped walking and looked at her seriously. "Jennifer, I've worked with kids for 20 years. This one. Just keep an open mind, okay?" When they entered the conference room, Maya was sitting cross-legged in her chair, something most people would find uncomfortable. She was studying a pencil like she'd never seen one before, turning it over in her hands and testing its point on a piece of paper. "Maya, this is Jennifer Walsh. She's here to help figure out your situation." Maya looked up with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "More people who want to help me," she said quietly. "Yesterday it was the sheriff. Today it's you. Tomorrow, who will it be?" Jennifer sat down across from Maya, opening her briefcase and pulling out forms. "I'm from the Department of Children and Family Services. My job is to make sure young people are safe and have what they need." "I am safe," Maya said simply. "I have been safe for 10 years in the mountains. I am only unsafe now because I came here." "Tell me about those 10 years, Jennifer said, pen ready to take notes. "Who took care of you?" "My grandmother, Elena. She was a curandera, a healer. When my parents died in the car accident, she took me away from the city, away from the sadness and the noise. She said the mountains would teach me things no school ever could." Jennifer wrote quickly. "And where exactly did you live?" "What was the address?" Maya looked confused. "Address? There was no address. We lived where the land was good, where the water ran clean, where the spirits felt peaceful. Sometimes by the big oak tree near the South Ridge. Sometimes by the cave that stayed warm in winter. Sometimes by the meadow where the best herbs grew. You moved around? You were homeless?" "Homeless?" Maya's voice rose slightly. "The whole mountain was our home, every tree, every rock, every stream. How can you be homeless when the entire world belongs to you?" Jennifer paused in her note-taking. This wasn't going the way these conversations usually went. "Maya, what about school? Did your grandmother teach you to read and write?" "Yes, but not just words on paper. She taught me to read the sky for weather, to read animal tracks for hunting, to read the faces of people to know if they speak truth or lies." To prove her point, Maya looked directly at Jennifer. "You are worried about me, but you are also curious. You want to help, but you also want to understand something you have never seen before. You have children of your own. I can see it in how your hands move when you talk about young people, and you are tired, very tired." Jennifer's pen stopped moving. Maya was right about everything, including the exhaustion that came from too many difficult cases and not enough sleep. "How did you know that?" "My grandmother taught me. She said people carry their stories in their bodies, in their voices, in the space around them. You just have to know how to look." Over the next hour, Jennifer asked standard questions and got very non-standard answers. Maya could recite plant names in 3 different languages and explain their medicinal uses. She could describe complex survival techniques and demonstrate knots that sailors would recognize. But she'd never heard of algebra, couldn't name the current president, and thought the internet was some kind of invisible spirit that lived in people's small magic boxes. Maya, Jennifer said carefully, I need to ask about documentation. Birth certificate, social security number, school records? What are these things? Papers that prove who you are, where you were born, that you exist in our system? Maya was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother said the government took children away from families, put them in places where they forgot their true names, forgot how to listen to the earth. She said papers were chains that kept people from being free. She never registered your birth, never got you official documents? She said I was born under the full moon in the sacred clearing, the mountain. Witness my birth, the stars welcomed me. The wind sang my name. Why do I need permission from strangers to exist? Jennifer realized she was dealing with something completely outside her training. This wasn't neglect or abuse, it was a deliberate choice to live outside modern society entirely. Can you show me some of what your grandmother taught you? Jennifer asked, putting down her pen. Maya's whole demeanor changed. The wariness left her face, replaced by enthusiasm. You want to learn? They went outside to the small garden behind the sheriff's station. Maya knelt beside some weeds that the maintenance crew usually pulled up. This is plantain, she said, picking a broad-leafed plant. People call it a weed, but it stops bleeding and heals cuts. She crushed the leaves between her fingers, releasing a green smell. And this dandelion, the leaves clean the blood, the roots help the liver, the flowers make wine. She moved through the tiny garden like she was reading a book, pointing out edible plants, medicinal herbs, and natural indicators that most people would never notice. See how the sparrows are flying low today? Rain will come before evening. And that dog across the street, he's favoring his right front paw. Probably has a thorn or small injury. Jennifer looked at the dog. Sure enough, it was walking with a slight limp she hadn't noticed before. Maya, this knowledge is impressive, but you need other skills too. Math, science, history. I know the history of my people, the real history that doesn't get written in books. I know the science of which plants grow where and why. I know the math of seasons and animal cycles and star movements. But what about modern life? Using computers, understanding economics, preparing for a career? Maya stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. Why should I prepare for a life that makes people sick and sad? In the city, people take medicine for sadness, medicine for sleep, medicine to wake up. They breathe poison air and drink poison water, and eat food that has no life in it. They work at jobs they hate to buy things they don't need. Why is this better than living free? It was a question Jennifer couldn't easily answer. She'd seen plenty of kids from normal families who were depressed, anxious, struggling with addiction or violence. Maya, despite her unconventional upbringing, seemed remarkably healthy and confident. What about your horse? Jennifer asked, changing the subject. Espiritu. Tell me about him. Maya's face lit up. I found him when he was very young, maybe 1-year-old. He had fallen into a ravine and broken his leg. Other horses had left him behind. I carried him home. He was not heavy then, and my grandmother showed me how to set the bone, how to make poultices for the swelling. And he stayed with you? For 3 months, I fed him by hand, helped him walk, slept beside him to keep him warm. When his leg healed, I opened the corral gate. I told him he was free to go find his herd. But he didn't leave? He walked to the gate, looked out at the mountains, then came back to me. He chose our family. We have been together for 6 years now. He's not just my horse. He is my brother, my friend, my companion on the journey. Jennifer had investigated cases of animal neglect before, but Espiritu was clearly healthy, well cared for, and devoted to Maya. The bond between them was unlike anything she'd seen. The paint on his fur, did you do that? My grandmother taught me the old symbols. Each one tells the spirit something about our journey. The red circle protects us from getting lost. The white lightning gives us speed when we need to run. The blue waves help us find water. Do you really believe that, the spiritual part? Maya considered this seriously. I believe that intention has power. When I paint the symbols, I think about protection and guidance and strength. Maybe the spirits help, maybe the symbols just remind me to be careful and brave. Does it matter which one is true if the result is the same? As the afternoon wore on, Jennifer found herself genuinely fascinated by Maya's way of seeing the world. This wasn't a case of a neglected child who needed rescue. This was a young woman who'd received a completely different kind of education. One that most people had forgotten existed, but Jennifer also knew the reality of the situation. Maya had no legal existence, no way to function in modern society without documentation. She was technically a minor without proper guardianship. The law was clear about what needed to happen next. Maya, Jennifer said finally, I can see that your grandmother loved you and taught you valuable things. But you can't live in the modern world without certain basics. You need identification, you need education credentials, you need legal residence. And if I refuse these things, Jennifer sighed, then the courts will have to decide what's best for you. Probably foster care, mandatory schooling, psychological evaluation. The news van arrived on Thursday morning, followed by 2 more before noon. Word about the wild girl and her painted horse had spread beyond Cedar Falls, attracting reporters who smelled a story that would capture national attention. Maya watched. From the window of the Hartley Ranch, where she was staying temporarily, her expression unreadable as cameras set up across the road. They want to make you famous, said Mrs. Hartley, bringing Maya a cup of tea she'd barely touched. The older woman had volunteered to house Maya while the authorities figured out what to do next, though neither of them had expected the media circus. Famous for what? Maya asked. For being different? For not fitting into their boxes? Some. People see you as inspiring. A symbol of freedom, of living authentically. Maya turned away from the window. And others? Mrs. Hartley hesitated. Others think you need help, protection. They say no child should grow up without proper education, without knowing the modern world. The phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters wanting interviews, child welfare advocates offering support, government officials demanding action. Even a television producer had called, suggesting a documentary about Maya's unique upbringing, but Maya herself remained the calm center of the storm swirling around her. She spent her days in the Hartley's back pasture with Espiritu, speaking to him in their mixture of languages while avoiding the crowds that gathered at the property's edge. The real trouble started when the Department of Education got involved. Dr. Patricia Mills arrived with a briefcase full of standardized tests and a stern expression that had intimidated countless students over her 30-year career. She was there to evaluate Maya's educational level and determine what remedial programs would be necessary. We'll start with basic mathematics, Dr. Mills announced, setting papers on the kitchen table. Simple addition and subtraction. Maya looked at the worksheet with its neat rows of numbers. 3 plus 5 equals 8, she said without picking up the pencil. 7 minus 2 equals 5. 15 divided by 3 equals 5. Please show your work on paper. Why? The answers are correct. Because that's how we verify learning. Please complete the worksheet. Maya stared at the paper for several minutes, then began drawing instead of solving problems. Her pencil moved quickly, sketching the view from the kitchen window trees. Mountains, a hawk circling overhead. Miss Rodriguez, this is a mathematics test, not art class. You want to know if I understand numbers? Maya asked, not looking up from her drawing. Last winter, my grandmother and I needed to store enough food for 4 months of snow. We caught 12 fish per week in the fall, dried them for preservation. Each fish feeds one person for 2 days. How many fish did we need to catch to survive? Until spring, Dr. Mills calculated quickly in her head. Approximately 96 fish. We caught 98 plus extra for the lean weeks when storms kept us inside. I have been doing mathematics since I was small, but not your way. I count seasons and animal tracks and herb harvests. I measure distance by how long it takes to walk, not by numbers on a map. The standardized tests continued to go poorly. Mia couldn't identify the Civil War's dates, but could recite the oral history of 3 different Native American tribes. She'd never heard of Shakespeare, but could tell stories that had been passed down through generations. Stories that held just as much wisdom about human nature. When they tested her reading comprehension with a passage about urban planning, Maya struggled. But when Mrs. Hartley gave her a book about medicinal plants, she read it fluently, correcting several errors the authors had made about harvest timing and preparation methods. The child is clearly behind grade level in essential subjects, Dr. Mills reported to the growing committee of officials handling Maya's case. She need intensive remedial education, possibly in a specialized facility? But then something happened that changed everyone's perspective, little Katie Hartley. Mrs. Hartley's 7-year-old granddaughter had been visiting when she developed a high fever and severe stomachache. The family was preparing to rush her to the emergency room when Maya quietly asked if she could help. Fever and stomach pain. Together, in a child her age, after eating green apples from your tree yesterday, Maya said, studying Katie's flushed face and listening to her breathing. She has what my grandmother called green fruit sickness. Her stomach is working too hard to process the unripe fruit. Maya went to the kitchen and returned with a simple tea made from mint and ginger she'd found growing wild behind the barn. Within an hour, Katie's fever broke and her stomachache disappeared. The child fell into peaceful sleep while the adults stared in amazement. "How did you know?" Mrs. Hartley whispered. "My grandmother treated this many times. Children always eat too much unripe fruit when they first discover apple trees. The signs are always the same: fever, stomach pain, restlessness. The cure is simple if you know what to look for." Dr. Rodriguez from the medical clinic heard about the incident and came to interview Maya. He brought medical textbooks and was astounded to discover that Maya could identify symptoms and suggest treatments for dozens of common ailments using natural remedies. "Where did you learn about the nervous system?" he asked, pointing to a diagram. "I don't know those words," Maya admitted. "But I know the body has rivers of energy that carry messages from the mind to the hands and feet. When people are very scared or very sad, these rivers get blocked, and that's when sickness begins." She was describing concepts that Western medicine was only beginning to understand about the connection between mental and physical health. But she explained it in terms that made sense to her worldview. The incident with Katie created a divide in the community. Some people began to see Maya as gifted, possessing knowledge that could benefit everyone. Others worried that she was being romanticized, that people were ignoring the serious gaps in her education. Pastor Williams from the local church visited the ranch, concerned about Maya's spiritual welfare. "Child, have you been baptized? Do you know Jesus Christ as your Savior?" Maya listened respectfully but answered honestly. "My grandmother taught me that the Creator speaks through all living things. In the wind, in the water, in the animals we share the earth with." She said some people find the Creator in buildings made by humans, but we found the Creator every day in the world that was made for us. But what about salvation? What about eternal life? Every sunrise is eternal life beginning again. Every season that turns is the Creator's promise that death leads to rebirth. I see salvation in every seed that grows into a tree, every river that finds its way to the sea. Pastor Williams left more confused than when he'd arrived. Maya's spirituality was deep and genuine, but it didn't fit into any category he understood. The legal complications grew more complex daily. Child Services insisted Maya needed formal guardianship and schooling. Immigration officials questioned her citizenship status since she had no birth certificate. Educational authorities demanded she be placed in age-appropriate classes immediately. Maya watched all this with growing sadness and frustration. "They want to fix me," she told Espiritu during one of their evening rides through the pasture. "But I am not broken. I am just different." The horse nickered softly, as if he understood perfectly. The breaking point came when a social worker arrived with forms for Maya to sign, agreeing to enter foster care and begin mandatory remedial education. "I will not sign papers that make me a prisoner," Maya said firmly. You're not becoming a prisoner. You're becoming a legal resident with rights and protections. Rights to do what? To sit in rooms with no windows, learning about a world that makes people sick. Protection from what? From the mountains that raised me? From the knowledge my grandmother died to preserve? Protection from neglect, from exploitation, from falling through the cracks of society? Maya stood up, her eyes flashing with the same fierce independence she'd shown the first day in town. I would rather fall through your cracks than be trapped in your cage, even if the cage has comfortable bars and people who mean well. The standoff attracted more media attention. Protesters arrived, some supporting Maya's right to choose her own path, others demanding the state protect her from what they saw as a harmful situation. Maya herself remained remarkably calm in the center of the chaos. She continued her daily routines, caring for Espiritu, helping Mrs. Hartley with garden work, and quietly observing the strange world she'd stumbled into. But at night, when she thought no one was watching, she would stand at the fence line and stare at the mountains where she'd spent her childhood. The distance between her old life and this new reality seemed to grow larger every day. What am I supposed to do? She asked the stars one evening, speaking in the language her grandmother had taught her. How do I honor your memory while living in a world that says everything you taught me is wrong? The stars offered no easy answers, just their ancient light and the promise that some things remain constant even when everything else changes. Maya knew she was standing at a crossroads that would determine the rest of her life. Behind her lay the mountains and the old ways, the freedom and the loneliness of a life lived entirely outside modern society. Ahead lay integration, education, legal recognition, and the possible loss of everything that made her who she was. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Luna Blackhorse arrived in Cedar Falls on a rainy Monday morning, driving a dusty pickup truck instead of the government sedan everyone expected. She was a child psychologist, but unlike the others who had tried to evaluate Maya, Dr. Blackhorse brought something different. Understanding. She was Native American herself, from the Navajo Nation, and had spent years working with children caught between traditional and modern worlds. When she heard about Maya's case through professional networks, she knew she had to get involved. Where is she? Dr. Blackhorse asked Sheriff Thompson, shaking rain from her long black hair. At the Hartley Ranch, probably hiding from another reporter. Fair warning, she's not exactly cooperative with authority figures these days. Dr. Blackhorse smiled. Good, that means her spirit isn't broken yet. When she arrived at the ranch, Maya was in the barn brushing Espiritu's coat. The horse lifted his head as Dr. Blackhorse approached, but didn't seem alarmed. Animals, Maya had learned, were good judges of people's intentions. Beautiful horse, Dr. Blackhorse said in Spanish, then switched to English. The paint tells. A story. Maya paused in her brushing. You can read the symbols? Some of them. The red circle for protection, the white lightning for speed and power. But these others... Dr. Blackhorse pointed to some markings on Espiritu's flank. These look like they combine different tribal traditions. Your grandmother was teaching you from many sources. For the first time in weeks, Maya smiled genuinely. She said wisdom belongs to all people, not just one tribe. She learned from whoever would teach her, Lakota healers, Mexican curanderas, even some white doctors who understood old ways. Smart woman. What was her name? Elena Sandoval. She said her grandfather was Cherokee, her grandmother was from Mexico, and somewhere in the family line there was Irish blood too. She said I carry all those stories in my bones. Dr. Blackhorse nodded. Multi-generational wisdom. No wonder you're having trouble fitting into their neat categories. They talked for hours. Dr. Blackhorse didn't ask Maya to take tests or fill out forms. Instead, she listened to stories about life in the mountains, asked about traditional healing methods, and shared some of her own experiences growing up between two worlds. I had to learn their system, Dr. Blackhorse explained. College, medical school, all the degrees and certifications. But I never forgot what my grandmother taught me about reading people's spirits, about understanding illness as more than just physical symptoms. Did it help, learning their way? It gave me tools to help my people in ways my grandmother never could. When children in my community struggle with depression or addiction, I can offer both traditional healing and modern therapy. When families face legal problems, I understand both worlds enough to translate between them. Maya was quiet, considering this. But did you lose yourself? Did learning their ways make you forget who you really are? Sometimes I worried about that, but then I realized I'm not just preserving my grandmother's knowledge for museums or history books. I'm keeping it alive by using it to help real people with real problems. That makes it more powerful, not less. That evening, Dr. Blackhorse met with the growing committee of officials, social workers, and community leaders who had been trying to decide Maya's fate. This child is not damaged goods that needs fixing, she told them bluntly. She's a young woman with extraordinary knowledge who needs a bridge between her world and yours, not forced conversion from one to the other. But she can't function. In modern society without basic education, Dr. Mills protested. She doesn't know algebra, can't use a computer, has never heard of the Constitution. And most of your high school graduates don't know which plants can save their lives in an emergency, can't read weather patterns, and have never learned to truly listen to what another person is saying beyond their words. Different doesn't mean deficient. Dr. Blackhorse had prepared a proposal, one that was radical enough to make several committee members uncomfortable. Maya needs what I call bridge education. Keep her traditional knowledge as the foundation, but add modern skills as tools she can use when needed. Teach her about computers and legal systems and contemporary science, but don't make her abandon everything her grandmother taught her. That's not how our educational system works, the school superintendent said. We have standards, curricula, age-appropriate grade levels. Then maybe your system needs to expand. How many of your students are dealing with depression, anxiety, disconnection from nature and community? Maybe they could learn something from Maya too. The room fell silent. Several people looked uncomfortable with the idea that a teenage girl without formal education might have something to teach their modern students. Jennifer Walsh, the social worker who had first interviewed Maya, spoke up. What would this bridge education look like practically? Dr. Blackhorse opened her folder. Individual tutoring to help Maya understand legal systems, basic technology, and contemporary academic subjects, but taught in ways that connect to what she already knows. Math through natural patterns and traditional measurements. Science through her understanding of plant medicine and animal behavior. History through oral traditions she's already learned. And in exchange, asked Sheriff Thompson. Maya shares her knowledge with the community, teaches workshops on traditional healing, wilderness survival, sustainable living practices, shows people skills they've forgotten but might need again someday. The proposal was unlike anything the officials had encountered. Instead of forcing Maya to abandon her past, it suggested her past might be valuable to others. Mrs. Hartley raised her hand tentatively. After what happened with my granddaughter Katie, when Maya knew exactly how to help her, I've been thinking. My own grandmother knew things about healing that doctors today have forgotten. Maybe we lost something important when we decided old knowledge wasn't worth keeping. Dr. Rodriguez from the medical clinic nodded. I've been researching some of the plant medicines Maya mentioned. Several are being studied by pharmaceutical companies now. Traditional healers identified their properties centuries before we did. The tide in the room was shifting, but not everyone was convinced. This is all very interesting, said a representative from the state education department, but we have legal requirements. Standardized testing, grade level progression, documented curriculum hours. Dr. Blackhorse leaned forward. And how's that working out? Are your students happier, healthier, more connected to their communities than previous generations? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. What about guardianship? Jennifer asked. Maya is still a minor without legal family. I've discussed this with my tribal council, Dr. Blackhorse said. We're willing to extend kinship recognition to Maya, not formal adoption, but acknowledgement that she belongs to our community. It would give her legal standing while respecting her independence. Maya, who had been listening from the doorway without anyone noticing, stepped into the room. "You're talking about me like I'm not here," she said quietly. "Like I'm a problem to be solved instead of a person who can speak for herself." Everyone turned to look at her. She seemed older somehow, as if the weeks of scrutiny and debate had aged her beyond her 17 years. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Blackhorse said about bridges between worlds." Maya looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "My grandmother taught me that the strongest trees are the ones with roots deep in the earth but branches that can bend with the wind." She walked to the center of the room, moving with that natural grace that reminded everyone she'd grown up in the wilderness. "I don't want to lose what my grandmother gave me. Her knowledge, her stories, her way of seeing the world. But I also understand that I live in your world now, whether I chose it or not. Maybe I can learn your ways without forgetting mine." "What are you saying?" Jennifer asked gently. "I'm saying yes to the bridge education. Yes, to learning about computers and laws and mathematics on paper, but only if you also say yes to learning from me. Only if my knowledge is treated as valuable, not just something to be tolerated while you teach me real subjects." Dr. Mills looked skeptical. "What could you possibly teach our students that they need to know?" Maya smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the wild, confident girl who had ridden into town weeks ago. "I can teach them how to be still enough to hear what the world is really saying. How to find food and medicine in places they walk past every day. How to read the stories written in animal tracks and weather patterns. How to listen to their own bodies and spirits instead of just the voices on their phones." She paused, looking out the window at the mountains where she'd grown up. "Most of all, I can teach them that there are many ways to be smart, many ways to be successful, many ways to be human. Maybe that's something they need to remember." The room was quiet as people absorbed her words. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Maya tilted her head slightly, reading the approaching storm. "Rain will be heavy tonight," she said matter-of-factly. "The kind that floods the low roads. You might want to take the mountain route home." Dr. Blackhorse smiled. "I think we can make this work." 18 months later, Maya stood in front of the Cedar Falls Community Center, watching children press their faces against the windows to catch a glimpse of Espiritu. The painted horse waited patiently in the parking lot, his red and white symbols bright in the morning sun. Today was different from that first day she'd ridden into town. Today, people were excited to see her arrive. "Ready for another adventure?" she whispered to Espiritu in Spanish, scratching behind his ears in the spot that always made him lean into her touch, inside the community center. 30 people waited for Maya's monthly workshop on traditional plant medicine. The group included everyone from teenagers to grandparents, from skeptical doctors to eager gardeners. Word had spread throughout the region about the young woman who could identify healing plants most people considered weeds. "Before we go outside," Maya began, standing in front of the group without notes or slides, "I want you to think about something. Your great-grandparents probably knew these plants. They used them when doctors were scarce and hospitals were far away. This knowledge lived in your families once. Today we're just remembering what was never really lost." Mrs. Chen from the bakery raised her hand. "My grandmother used to make tea from some plant for headaches, but I never learned which one." "Willow bark, probably," Maya said with a smile. "We'll find some today." The tree speaks to pain in ways that even modern aspirin learned from. They spent the morning walking through the fields behind the community center. Maya moved easily between English and Spanish, sometimes throwing in Cherokee words her grandmother had taught her. She showed them how to identify plants not just by their leaves, but by where they chose to grow, how they smelled when crushed, even how animals interacted with them. "See how the rabbits have nibbled this plantain but left a similar-looking plant next to it alone?" Maya pointed to 2 green patches that looked almost identical to untrained eyes. "Animals know the difference. They can teach us if we watch carefully." Tommy, the mechanic who had watched her arrive that first day, knelt beside a patch of what most people would call weeds. "So this stuff really works for cuts and scrapes?" Try it, Maya said. Next time you get a small injury at the shop, clean it well, then chew some fresh plantain leaves and put them on the wound. But still keep your first aid kit handy, she added with a grin. Traditional medicine and modern medicine can work together. After the workshop, Maya drove her small pickup truck, a compromised vehicle that let her carry supplies while still feeling more natural than a sedan, to Cedar Falls High School. She'd earned her GED 6 months earlier, but not through traditional studying. Instead, Dr. Blackhorse had helped her take tests that connected modern knowledge to things she already understood. For the math portion, she'd calculated herbal dosages and tracked seasonal migrations. For science, she'd explained plant biochemistry and animal behavior patterns. For social studies, she'd traced the oral histories she knew through documented historical events. The testing officials had never seen anything like it, but Maya's scores proved she understood the concepts. Even if she'd learned them differently, now she was working with Dr. Blackhorse to develop programs for other young people who felt disconnected from traditional education. They called it the Alternative Pathways Project, and it was attracting attention from educators across the country. "Maya," called out Jessica, a 16-year-old who'd been struggling in regular classes until she joined Maya's wilderness skills group. "Can you help me with something?" They walked to a quiet corner of the school courtyard. Jessica looked embarrassed as she spoke. "My mom's been really stressed lately. She's working 2 jobs and taking care of my sick grandfather. Yesterday I found her crying in the kitchen. She won't go to a doctor because we can't afford it, but she's not sleeping and barely eating. Is there ... Is there anything natural that might help?" Maya listened carefully, her grandmother's training kicking in. Stress that goes on too long can make the whole body sick. There are plants that can help with sleep and anxiety, but the real medicine your mother needs is support. Has she talked to anyone about how she's feeling? She says she doesn't have time for talking, says we can't afford therapy. What about the community support group at the church? Pastor Williams started it last month for people dealing with family stress. It's free, and they meet while you're in school. Jessica looked surprised. "You know about that?" Maya smiled. "I pay attention to what happens in this town. Your mom helped my friend Mrs. Hartley when her husband was in the hospital last year. Maybe it's time for people to help her back." This was how Maya had learned to blend her traditional knowledge with modern realities. She still knew which plants could ease anxiety and promote sleep, but she also understood that healing often required community support, professional counseling, or medical intervention. The key was knowing when to use which approach. Later that afternoon, Maya found herself at her favorite spot, a hill overlooking the town where she could see both the community below and the mountains where she'd grown up. Espiritu grazed nearby. Content to wander within the sound of her voice, her phone buzzed with a text message. Even now, 18 months later, the device still felt strange in her hands, but she'd learned to appreciate how it connected her to people who needed help. The message was from Dr. Rodriguez at the medical clinic. "Maya, can you come in tomorrow? I have a patient with chronic pain who isn't responding well to medications. Wondering if you have any traditional approaches we could discuss." This collaboration with the local doctor had developed slowly. Initially, Dr. Rodriguez had been skeptical of traditional medicine, but after seeing Maya's success with various community members, and after researching the scientific basis for many traditional remedies, he'd become genuinely interested in integrative approaches. Maya never diagnosed illnesses or recommended people avoid medical care. Instead, she helped people understand how traditional healing practices could work alongside modern medicine. She taught stress reduction through connection with nature, showed people how certain plants could supplement prescribed treatments, and helped families understand the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a producer in California who wanted to make a documentary about her life. Maya deleted it without responding, as she did with most media requests these days. She'd learned that fame and attention could be just another kind of cage. What mattered to her was the work itself. The slow, steady process of helping people reconnect with knowledge their great-grandparents had taken for granted. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains gold and purple, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that first day she'd ridden into Cedar Falls. She now had legal identification, a bank account and an address. She could use computers and smartphones, understood legal contracts, and had even learned to drive a car, but she still slept outside under the stars whenever possible. She still spoke to Espiritu in the mixture of languages her grandmother had taught her. She still read weather patterns and animal behavior, still gathered herbs, according to moon phases and seasonal cycles. The difference was that now she didn't have to choose between her traditional knowledge and modern life. She'd found a way. To honor both, a young family walked past on the trail below, parents with two small children who were collecting interesting rocks and leaves. Maya watched as the mother helped her daughter identify different tree species, remembering her own childhood when every walk with her grandmother had been a lesson in reading the natural world. Maybe that's what healing really meant, Maya thought. Not just treating illness, but helping people remember their connection to the earth, to each other, to the wisdom that lived in their own bodies and communities. Espiritu lifted his head and nickered softly, looking toward the mountains. Maya followed his gaze and saw what he'd noticed: a small herd of wild horses moving across a distant ridge, free and beautiful in the dying light. "Yes, old friend," she said, running her hand along his painted neck. "We're still free too. And just in a different way now." As darkness settled over Cedar Falls, Maya made her way back to town. Tomorrow would bring new people seeking help, new students wanting to learn traditional skills, new opportunities to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern needs. She'd found her place in the world not by abandoning who she was, but by showing others that there were many ways to be fully human. The wild child who had once belonged to no one now belonged to herself, to her community, and to the ongoing work of keeping old knowledge alive in a changing world. Her grandmother's spirit lived on, not just in memories but in every person who learned to see healing plants in their backyard weeds, every child who learned to read the sky for weather, every adult who remembered that wisdom could come from the most unexpected sources. Maya Rodriguez had become a bridge between worlds. And in building that bridge, she'd discovered that some kinds of freedom could only be found by choosing to belong.